Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello, my name is Simon Jacobson, and I welcome you all, as well as the web audience, wherever you are in the world. I wish I was able to ask this to everyone out there, but I'll ask at least here. Would anybody here categorize themselves as a lost soul? There we go. We have one volunteer. I know it's a sensitive question, and I understand from you not raising your hand doesn't mean you aren't. You just don't want to discuss it. Let's put it this way. And so no conclusive. Fine. But Jeff, I guess you've been to a lot of therapy. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, just for the record, if it's a consolation. The Kabbalists explain that all of us are lost souls. Every one of us. Those that are aware of it are actually on a higher level than those that are not. You see, the reason for that is because we live in a material world, and it's dominated by tangible senses and everything we experience with our physical tools. Our sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, and touch, and smell. And a soul feels like a stranger in this world. As a matter of fact, there's an entire elaborate process to convince, or actually to entice, or to actually coerce and force a soul to come down to this earth. There's a Mishnah in the Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers that we study and read in the weeks between Passover and Shavuos, these weeks. There's 6 chapters, so each of the 6 Shabbos is between Passover and Shavuos. Each week we read another chapter. So there's an expression there, Al Karcha Chatachai, that God commands and tells the soul, you must come down to this earth. Because the soul on its own does not want to come. Because when it gives one look at what this world looks like, it doesn't. Which pure soul would want to enter this universe? Besides, for the issues of that a soul does not have issues of health, livelihood, eating, sleeping, all the material needs that we have to survive. Then there's all the corruption and greed and pain and suffering that we perpetrate on each other, against each other. So a soul doesn't want to come to this earth. And nevertheless, it's commanded to do so. And the comparison is to a flame. When you look at a flame burning, so you see a flame in a wick, the flame is constantly rising upward, licking the air as if it doesn't want to be here. And if there was no wick, if you think of the flame, it would just expire to the heaven itself. So the example given is Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. The soul of a human being is a flame of God. So like a flame, the soul is constantly searching and looking upward, yearning for something better than this universe. Even as it exists in this world, which is really the root of all our restlessness and all our even anxiety and angst, because of a soul that is not happy, not satisfied, not content. So there's a restlessness, and that actually is healthy. It's healthy not to just be ignorance is bliss, animal bliss, to just live a mediocre and passive life. It's a healthy thing to have a certain measure of restlessness and angst, which is what motivates and drives us to want to succeed and grow in every possible way. It's only when it's out of proportion, when the angst turns into anxiety and into fear and into other forces that debilitate us, that's when it's too much. So you need to have tension and resolution. But the concept of a soul looking for something deeper and greater is very much what makes us human and what makes us special. So the soul is really a wandering creature on this earth. It never becomes comfortable with circumstances in this material world. So in that sense, the soul is a lost entity here. Lost in the sense that it's not at home. It's away from home. Whereas in heaven, in the spiritual planes, a soul is in its own habitat, it's in its own environment. where it's comfortable and doesn't have to deal with the challenges. Here a soul is essentially a slave to the body. And the body and its bodily needs and our own selfish desires and self-interest decide we want to do something, we force the soul to go along with us. The soul is hence, in other words, the force of energy that gives us life. In truth is, the way it should work is the other way around, and which is the whole purpose of existence, is that the soul should be the captain of the ship, and the body should just be the vehicle. But imagine the vehicle telling the captain where to go. Well, that's very much what our lives are like, where the material needs and our immediate needs drive our interests, and in turn the soul has to go along, it has no choice, it's locked in your body. And it's your choice. So the soul in many ways is lost in this world. As I say, some is more lost than others, and it's part of the theme. This is the theme I want to discuss this evening. It's also in context of today. Today is a special day in the Hebrew calendar. It's the 15th of Iyar, which is called Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, second Pesach, which is based on a episode in the Bible, in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, chapter Ba'aleischa. The story goes that, I'll read it straight from the source, chapter 9, verse 1, in the book of Numbers, 9:1. God speaks to Moses in the Sinai wilderness. This is the second year from when they went out of Egypt. So it's a year exactly from the year from they left Egypt. And it says to them the Jews should do, obviously, to observe Passover in its time, which is on the 14th day of Nisan. Leading into the 15th, they should bring the Passover, the Paschal Lamb, and observe Passover. And the Torah continues and says that's exactly what they did. But then it continues, something happens. There were people, it says there were a group of people who at the time of Passover were ritually impure. The expression is Tmeim Lenefesh Adam. They were impure either as a result of a death in the family or anything like that. It's a spiritual impurity that did not allow them to bring the offering, the Passover offering, on the regular scheduled day, which is the 15th of Nisan. And these people came over to Moses and said, and Moses and Aaron, and said, we were impure during Passover. Lam Negara, why should we be deprived? Why should we be deprived and prevented from bringing this offering just because it was not our choice that we were impure? Moses says to them he has to ask God what to do. It was a situation that he could not resolve on his own. So this verse continues and says that he speaks to God, and God tells him to tell the people as follows. And we have here a new mitzvah that came as a result of this request, of this demand, or this beseeching of the people that were impure. And the mitzvah goes like this: tell them that any person, this is God saying to Moses, this is the mitzvah, any person who's tamei lenefesh, who for whatever reason became ritually, spiritually impure, or was bederech recheka, was in a distant road, meaning they were far away from the temple during Passover, because the Passover offering had to be brought to the temple, so they were away from the temple. To either you now or in generations to come, they shall choose a month from Passover, which is the 15th of Iyar. This is exactly 1 month ago was Passover from today. On this day, they shall bring the offering. And in other words, and this forever is called Pesach Sheni. It doesn't have all the laws of Passover as the initial Passover, which is 8-day holiday, and many other details. For example, not eating bread, eating matzah. All those elements don't exist in the second Passover. However, we do in the time of the temple. This was an opportunity for people who missed the boat, essentially, who were not able to bring the offering in the temple, either for one of these two reasons, because of impurity or because of distance. This was an opportunity for them to complement it. to fulfill it. And forever this is called Pesach Sheni. Even now, today, when the temple is destroyed, obviously we don't bring offerings, but there are some customs of this day, including not saying certain tachnun. That's somewhat of a semi-holiday. Some people, many have the custom of tasting some matzah. But these are customs. But the day still remains part of our calendar. And what is the message, essentially? So one of the Hasidic Rebbes says, the message of Pesach Sheni, which means the second Passover, is Asinishtakim Farfalm in Yiddish, which means that there's never too late. Essential message is, ultimately, is that even those people seemingly you could say, well, too bad. You weren't around, or you couldn't bring an offering, time passed, and that's it. There are many things you missed the opportunity. There are many things in Judaism even that if they miss the day, you can't do anything about it. If, for example, other holidays, when Sukkah sends, there's no sitting in a Sukkah the day next day or next month. You didn't do it. And different offerings in the temple also, it says, Over Zmani Batel Karbone, the time passed. Time-sensitive mitzvahs, basically, you cannot do later. For example, daily mitzvahs even. There are certain mitzvahs that were incumbent upon us every day. A person misses prayers during one day. The question is, can he pray twice the next day? The answer is no. You can't. There are mitzvahs that are not time-sensitive. A person, for example, charity. If you didn't give charity that day, you can give the next day twice as much. But time-sensitive mitzvahs that are connected to a time period, whether it's a day, a month, a year, and so on, you cannot do later. There are many reasons given for it. Ultimately, the main reason is because the mitzvah is connected to the time. It's not just about doing the act, it's also about refining the time. For example, Shabbos, you light a Friday candle Shabbos, Friday night, before sundown. If you missed it, you can't light it Saturday night or Sunday night, because the time is not then. The energy of that moment is gone. And it's about sanctifying that particular time and moment. So one exception, is, however, is this episode here. It is an exception. And that's why Moses couldn't answer it on his own. Because on his own, Moses would have said, what am I supposed to tell you? There's all the mitzvahs, you miss it, that's it, you do it next year. But since they cried out, Lama Negara, why are we deprived? Why should we be deprived of such an important experience? He turned to God, and God did grant them this request. So we have here the lesson that there is never too late. It's never too late. Which of course extends to all many areas, not just the Passover. It extends to anything in life that we always know there's a second chance. In some instances, the second chance is a physical. Like in this case, they can bring the offering. But even there, we also understand that it's not quite the same experience as the first main Passover, which has a Seder and has all the details that a Passover, the holiday has. But it gave us an opening, that there is that opening. And in other mitzvahs, even if you miss it, what your lesson is, it's never too late. You can always do tshuva. You can always repair the past. And there are many things that can be derived from this message. It's never too late. I mean, Yom Kippur is a similar story. Yom Kippur is all about forgiveness, repairing, hope, even after there was a break, even after there was betrayal. Yom Kippur teaches us the power of rehabilitation, regenerating, renewing our lives. And of course, it's a fundamental theme in Judaism in general. There's no such thing as something is broken forever. Damaged goods. There's no such thing. Because that by virtue of the fact that we have a soul, and a soul is a piece of God, part of God. So just as God cannot be damaged goods, so our soul cannot ultimately be damaged goods. And therefore, even when some things are damaged on outer layers, on the inner layers, there's no real damage done. It would be the equivalent of God forbid, a person gets burned. So the burn may affect some of the layers of the skin, even if it's a serious burn. But there is a point where it does not affect. Now with a burn, the example is not complete, because we know burns can affect and ultimately kill somebody. But when it comes to a soul, we understand it as being like layers. And the outer layers can be severed and can be hurt, but the inner essence always remains connected. That doesn't justify being a criminal or doing something wrong. It means that you have hope to reconnect. And reconnecting, in a sense, almost like after a stroke victim, a person suffers a stroke, We know today that nerves can regrow, grow back, and even actually bypass the area of damage. It's the same thing in this case when a person has made a mistake, whether intentional or unintentional. They have the ability to correct it, to repair it, what we call tshuva. Tshuva means to return. You know, if you think about it, the word return seems odd. It should be repentance, which is usually how people translate tshuva, actually is the opposite of returning. When you regret something, you're going away from it. You did something wrong, you move away from it. So why is it called return? You're not returning to the mistake. The answer is because tshuva is returning to this essence where the mistake did not have any impact. In other words, returning to the essential person that transcends the area there was damage. Which is really the essence of all healing in this world. And I've discussed this many times here, conversations I've had with therapists and healers and psychologists, psychiatrists. You know, it always surprised me, how does somebody work in the healing industry of helping people heal from wounds and scars in their lives? They don't really believe that there's a soul that has the power to heal. Because if you think about it from purely a fatalistic, a type of Darwinian, Freudian model, where, you know, survival of the fittest, some people have been hurt, and that's it. Too bad. You have a wound, and that's it. Where do you have the power to heal after you've been hurt? Where's the power to rebuild after betrayal, after abuse, after violation of a person's boundaries? Whatever form of it, whether it's physical abuse or psychological, emotional, sexual abuse. You'd think that based on a principle that dog eats dog in a world where survival of the fittest is the key, the cardinal rule, you'd think, okay, that's it. It's too bad. You can't really turn the clock back. That damage has been done, and that's all. Judaism teaches that the soul always remains intact. No matter what happens in your life, the soul will never be fundamentally damaged. The connections between the soul and your body can be damaged, like in the stroke with the nerves, or the arteries can be blocked. A person can have a healthy heart, but if the arteries are clogged, it could affect the heart from pumping blood in a smooth way, in a seamless way, to the organs of the body. So the same true is here. The soul can be very powerful, but a person can sever the connection on many different levels, but the soul itself remains intact. So I'm not suggesting the work isn't hard work to be done, but there's hope. It means going back to the reservoir. Think of it like the soul being a reservoir of very abundant amount of very fresh water. And then something happens in life that water, before I say something happens, that water, we draw that water through, whether it's through a spring of water, through a well, or we create rivers, or we create channels that draw that water, and we're able to benefit, drink from it, and nourish ourselves. But then something happens. Something causes those arteries, causes those rivers to dry up. Something blocks them. Someone even goes and intentionally blocks them. What happens? The water remains in the reservoir, but it's now not being channeled into your life. That's like essentially a soul that has great potency and potential, but it remains dormant, like asleep and locked inside of you. Essentially, when we are born, that's what our soul is like. It's a soul that is a complete state of potential. As we grow through childhood, a healthy home, with his nurturing, with his love, with his acceptance, helps a person feel comfortable enough to allow their soul to emerge. Basically, all of education, all our training, all our growth is that reservoir of power within our soul. And each person has their own soul with their own unique skills and talents. Each of us is growing toward building the confidence and the skills to be able to draw from our soul into our actually day-to-day lives. So in the healthiest sense of the word, you'd have is that the person grows into an adult, their soul has full expression. If not full expression, much expression. What happens in an abusive environment, in an unhealthy, dysfunctional environment, or one where your skills are not taught, what happens is the soul remains trapped and locked inside itself, and it doesn't have the confidence to express itself on a very simple level. Someone growing up, for example, in a home where a parent or parents were abusive, very angry, and silenced the child, and punished the child, and was a very, a dark home. What happens? The child begins to shrink into himself or herself, and the soul doesn't feel comfortable to come out, to express itself. A person like that may have great, great skills and powers and talents, but was never allowed to emerge. This happens, unfortunately, more often than not. I've seen it. And the challenge later in life is to help a person build the confidence and nurture themselves or others nurturing them to be able to feel confident enough to express themselves in that way. Some of us are naturally shy people. Shyness often is confused by people who are not trained or not sensitive with being inadequate. In a classroom, each class you have children that don't express themselves or don't speak, and many people who just are very shallow see that as, okay, the child has nothing to say, or they're stupid, or whatever it is. When it could be a brilliant person who just never taught, or just by nature, by personality, disposition, doesn't feel comfortable communicating, whatever it may be. Since the King's speech has become such a phenomenon, and stuttering, people talk about that. Stutterers essentially are people who are extremely sensitive people. And their sensitivities, they don't stutter when they're alone. They don't stutter when they're extremely comfortable. It's all about being judged by others, and that, especially if growing up in a home that is very demanding or very aggressive or very domineering. Doesn't mean every domineering creates stuttering, but it's just an example of a person who could be fully capable, fully intelligent, even brilliant. It's just a form of expression that has been impeded, usually due to circumstances in life. Now there are obviously stutters that certain has to do with a speech defect from birth, stuff like that. But I'm talking about the more conventional one. I don't know if you know this, but 4 out of 5 stutterers are men, not women. It's an interesting statistic. I wrote about this once in context of Moses. The point, however, I'm making here is that we have 2 parts to us. We have we'll call it inner sanctum, our inner self, our inner soul, brimming with full kinds of powers and potential, to the point that none of us really even know how much we have within us. Even you yourself are not aware of your own power and potential. Sometimes things you do by accident, you're in the middle of a project with others and there's no one to do something, you end up doing the job, you suddenly realize you're good at it. Which happens in our teen years, in school, in camp, summer camp, when we travel. It's usually when we're challenged or when we're in a situation where nobody's taking care of us. Suddenly you have to take care of yourself, and you become very resourceful. And most of these discoveries are usually by accident. We're blessed. Maybe you meet a mentor that recognizes something in you, and they help cultivate it, they help nurture it, help you build it, and help you express it. But most situations, that's not the case. I don't want to go through every scenario. The point I'm making here is that the soul is a formidable force trapped in a material body, in a material world, like I said earlier, lost in a way. And as such, it has all kinds of strength. It has the strength to regenerate, and the strength of hope, and the strength of rebuilding after loss, and healing after damage. So when someone understands and relates and believes in your soul, then it makes sense that no matter what you've gone through in your life, that soul, however, can be accessed. And maybe now you have to reach deeper in order to heal from some type of damage. And that's what I was saying earlier. I've always wondered, how does someone who doesn't believe in that, that's not about a belief, who doesn't believe in a person, how could you take their money, and good money, in therapy, and not when you don't believe that they really can heal? I mean, why don't you announce to them and tell them that, something, I'm taking your money, but I don't really believe anything's going to change. And I've met therapists who are very seemingly ethical, but they just don't. To me, when I say this to them, they say, you can't mix God and soul into therapy. You have to be detached and so on. And for me, it's not a religious issue here. It's an issue of what is a person's capacity, potential. You can phrase it in completely secular terms. We definitely, let's put it this way, dead people don't go to therapy. I mean to be so morbid. You're alive. Something is ticking. Even though you may have lost hope, may have been hurt, you're trying to find something. You're trying to find a glimmer, a light that can help you grow. So it's critical that whoever is working with you has to believe in you and has to believe in your potential, has to believe that. If not, where are you going to go from here? Anyway, that's somewhat of an aside. So to go back to the discussion here, that Pesach Sheni teaches us, second Passover, there's no farfallen, there's nothing lost. Because there's a soul that always remains intact. So even though, using the expression from this of the verses I mentioned earlier, even though this Tomei Lenefesh, that the soul has in some way become impure. One of the ways is when a person comes in contact with death, something happens to the soul of a human being. In a sense, death is like a disconnect between the body and the soul. So anyone that's in touch with death and is a sensitive human being, it will have an impact on you that is like experiencing a mini-death. The grief, the psychological dissonance, emotional and spiritual pain around death affects all those that are impacted by it. You know, this coming Monday will be my father's 6th yahrzeit. He passed away 6 years ago on the 20th of Iyar. Okay, so Tuesday actually, I should correct. And even though the intensity of the loss and the intensity of the death and pain of it is not with me as it was 6 years ago, but it's not difficult for me to retrieve it because it's inside my memory, inside of my psyche. And at the time it was extremely traumatic. My father was 70 years old, so I'm not complaining in the sense that he didn't have, in a sense, I mean, 70 is young today, but nevertheless, every death is a death. Even when people lose their father or mother when they're 95, it's still a death. It's your parent. There's a certain finality to it. So I don't know if we can compare tragedies in a sense. Death is a tragedy. It's a cutoff. And there's much to be said about it. As much as you philosophize and pontificate, there's a cutoff. There's no way around that. And it affects not just the person who's passed on, it more importantly affects those that remain on this earth. Because you have to ponder the issues of life and death. And you think about yourself, and you think about your children, and you think about all people. The permanence of things, the impermanence of things. I mean, there's plenty to talk about, and nobody should ever have to taste from it. But those of us that have, know it's a very serious thing, and Judaism, in a way, honors it through Yizkor. The holidays we say Yizkor, we remember the souls of our parents, and through Kaddish and other ways. It's not the point I want to discuss really, but I want to just say that's what I'm referring to. So when someone was contaminated, so to speak, spiritually, polluted by death, they were unable to bring an offering into the temple. It's not a punishment. It's a state of being. When you're in that place, it's very difficult for you to focus on spiritual growth. I remember when I was sitting Shiva, it was a different zone. It's hard even to imagine. It was like hard to express. After 7 days, getting up, taking a walk in the street, which is accustomed to do, I was in a sense completely, what's the word for it? It was surreal. That's the word. Very surreal. Like, you know, all the things that mattered didn't matter anymore. And I remember saying to my sister, saying, so how long will this last? You know, this like sense of reality. And when we go back, when the curtain comes back down, we go back to our illusions, and they matter as anything. You know? So it doesn't take long; it takes a few days. But it's and you know it at the time. So you have 1 second, you have a moment of truth. You see something that's beyond. You realize how much of our lives are petty, involved with things that are very temporary, very immediate, things that don't have any real significance down the road, down the line. And then the things of like, you know, the legacies and the traditions and connections you have with your father and your mother. You know, my father goes back long before your memories, even the genes, the influences, and so on. So that context is a very powerful one. And today, you know, as I said, I think back, I can talk about it. But when you experience it, there's no question. It puts you in a frame of mind that you're not really in a position to go bring offerings the Passover and doing other things like that, as special as they may be. Which is why a person who sits Shiva, as again, no one should know of it, and it was called an oval for a year, or an oinen before the burial, is really absolved of many mitzvahs, many obligations. because it's as if you're in a place of certain grief, certain place of detachment from things, and so on. Spiritually, we all have moments like that. It's those moments when you feel lost, feel like a zombie, or you feel like aimless, not knowing where you're going, where your life is headed. Which brings me to the second expression. Even though the Jews who requested and said, Lama Negara, why are we deprived of bringing the offering? They talked about being impure, but when God commands it, He also says the second option, b'derech recheika, those that will be in a distant, derech recheika literally means a distant road. Because spiritually speaking, there are two ways that a person can be disconnected. Two ways a soul can be lost. One is by experiencing something like I just said, a trauma. And death was just one example. Trauma can be many ways. Anytime we experience some type of loss and so on, that's one way, that there's a certain sense of being lost. Lack of grounding, coordinates, and so on. And another is derech recheika, where you actually are in a place where you don't know where you are. You've wandered off and gotten lost, not due to an event, but simply due to your own journeys. Sometimes we begin on a journey and it's maybe a mistaken place to go to, and then you end up stuck there. You can't get out. This journey doesn't always mean physical. It could be psychological. It could be spiritual. It could be relationship-oriented. Getting yourself in a bad relationship is a derech recheika. You've wandered away to a very distant place. And both these situations, whether it's an event of traumatic event, which causes this impurity that I mentioned, or it's choices you've made, and or circumstances that have led you away from where you should be, this all creates a sense of a loss. That's a lost soul. Now, as I said, all of us have moments like this. Some of us are more aware than others. Now, let's just clarify this further. The fact that you may feel that everything's going well in your life doesn't mean anything, to be very blunt. The reason why is because, look, if a person has a good job, making money, you can buy what you like, and you so to speak riding high, that creates a certain called sugar coat effect that usually can distort and delude you into thinking everything is just great. Then suddenly you're struck, you're fired from a job, something happens, and you're left reeling because you're not prepared. So how exactly do we find that your life is working well? Just because it looks like it's working well, really working well means that no matter what happens to you, you'll be working well. Not just the circumstances at this moment are nice and good. So the Jewish way of looking at things, you don't just look at the symptoms, you look at the underlying forces. You can look at a building, beautiful building, structure and everything, and everyone thinks that maybe the most powerful building in the block or in the city, and then God forbid a storm strikes or an earthquake, and that building is the one that falls first. And other buildings that didn't look so good remain standing. So tell me, which building was the strongest building? In other words, we shouldn't be deceived, and this is often what we do, is we are consumed and we are controlled and affected very much by the here and now, by the world. As you know, we measure success, we measure power based on the immediate power. We don't necessarily base it on perpetuation, on the future. If you were a historian and were able to go back into history and come back now to tell the story, and you were to predict, let's say 3,000 years ago, which nation would be here today in the year 2011? So there's no question, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, the nations that were dominating then were the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, then the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. That's what everybody was. You would choose one of those that was the most powerful one at the time. Like most people think today, America, China maybe is rising. The fact of the matter is, all those empires fell. They have no descendants. All we have are ruins and essentially tourist attractions, like in museums, to see what fragments remain from their great civilizations. And you have a small nation that was always ma'at mikol amim, the fewest among all, That's here. Only 14 million people. Back then it must have been a lot less. And we're here. So if you're a historian and went through everything, the Holocaust, and before that the pogroms, and before that the Inquisition, and the Crusades, and all the persecutions, no one ever would predict that. I'm just using it as an example. So for someone to say, I know what's most powerful, is both arrogant and presumptuous and idiotic, actually. Because we do not know what's most powerful. Even today, technology, what's the most powerful technology? So we know what's powerful today. We also know what was powerful 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Microsoft dominated. Then today Google dominates. So any intelligent person knows. We do not know what will be in 10 years from now because there's too many unpredictable variables. The point being is that intelligence, as opposed to being seduced by the moment, teaches you, as I discussed last week at length, Ezu Chacham Harayas HaNeilad. Who's the wise person? The one that sees the birthing. Doesn't look at just the immediate symptom, the immediate cause, but looks at the long-term effects. What will this give birth to? And very wise people can see steps ahead. Just like a good chess player can see steps ahead. Can look at events, not be deceived by the moment, by the smoke screens, and is able to see a bigger picture. There aren't very many people that can do that well. Definitely not in a historical context. Some do it well in business and also not always successful. And few have real visionary ability. Vision, of course, to be able to see the big picture in the future. You have to also be a person who's a student of history and a student of the human condition in the past. Because most things have, in some way or another, played itself out. It's true there are new variables today, new characters, new countries, new players, but the scripts are very similar. Things like arrogance that brought down most empires is pretty universal, pretty timeless. But we sometimes think because we have so much technology, we think we're an advanced society. Again, how do you measure advanced? If you measure it by technology, yeah. If you measure it by standard of living, yes. By economic prosperity, yes. But what happens if you measure it by the welfare of children in their homes? How healthy are relationships? Would you also say we're the most advanced society? So you see, it all comes down to what tools we use to measure health and to measure success. So to go back to what I was talking before about the lost soul idea, that the key thing in most blessed thing in life is to have people who see you not for what you look like, but for what you are, for your essential value. And that's not easy to find because we worship externals, youth, looks, money, everything that's temporary is worshipped. Permanent things are not worshipped in this world because we live in a transient world, and it's much easier, especially in a highly technological society, to live in the moment. You look at breaking news today, since it's like 24/7 news, everything is breaking news. There's no longer distinction, every stupid little detail. So when Michael Jackson died, you had them marching on basically every plastic surgeon on earth, giving their opinion about him, because they have to fill the air, and we are voyeurism, looking and worshiping the moment. That's how it is. When you cut yourself off for a week from your iPhones and Androids and Blackberries and newspapers and so on, and you survive, it's pretty interesting, because we are plugged in, and plugged in means that we're very much controlled by other forces. Money, of course, sexuality are maybe the two dominant forces that drive most people's lives. And of course the misery and anxiety that comes always together with it. So there you got the picture of the human condition. And that has not changed throughout history. So when discussing here the idea of, as I was saying, Pesach Sheni, that there is nothing, that there's no farfallen, that there's always hope, there's always a second chance. It's really looking at the universe or looking at ourselves in a deeper way. As I mentioned before with the therapy, if you don't believe that the soul and the regenerative powers of the soul, that we have powers that we cannot see, and therefore no human being on earth is a damaged goods, no matter how hurt they've been, then you understand the power of the big picture. But to believe that is difficult because we live in a world that does not believe in us, and therefore we don't end up believing in ourselves. We live in a world, the blind leading the blind. So it's very appropriate to have a day like this, Pesach Sheni. As I explained, the spiritual meaning of the two types of wandering off. One is a person who's been experienced a trauma, the grief of death or of other loss, and the second is a person who's wandered away from who they really are. Wandered away from who they really are. And remember, the conditioning that we grow up with is a very big factor in this case. The Baal Shem Tov asks the question, says, we say every day in the prayer, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu, our God and the God of our parents. And he asks the question, the order should be reversed. First is the God of our parents, then it's our God. First our parents were around, then we come. And his answer is both simple and profound. Very profound, especially in practical terms. His answer is that the objective of relationship with God is that it be your God. It begins chronologically, yes, you are, whether you like it or not, a child of your parents, and the schools they sent you to, and the programming that they programmed you with, and based on their attitudes, for good or for bad, shape you. But there comes a point in your life when you grow into an adult where you're expected to not just have, to begin with Elokeinu, not Elokei Avosenu. That it's not just the God of our parents. I submit here, based on my own limited experience, that many, many people who are committed to tradition and Judaism and so on are perhaps worshiping the God of their parents or great-grandparents or great-great ancestors. To make it yours and own it is a whole different story. So to grow up in something, no matter how devout and pious and connected you are, and no matter how virtuous even, if it's based on a program that was given to you, it's still not yours. You have not owned it. Now it has its consequences, even though some people can get away with being conformists of that nature. But that's not a person who's found themselves. That's a person who is playing out the script that someone else wrote. And even if it looks like a good script, God himself says that he despises mitzvahs anoshim elamoda. In Yeshaya, the prophet, there's a whole chapter where he talks about this, how God says he despises people who just do things by rote, mechanically, without a heart, without their heart. And he goes on to a whole thing of how you can just do things by lip service, mechanically, by rote, robotic, and that's not necessarily a relationship. That's a machine. So, being lost soul is really something that's universal and applies to every human being on earth, because we're shaped by so many forces that it's very difficult to know even who you really are. Someone asks you, who am I? Most people, when you ask them that question, give you their business card. Now, your business card is what you do, not who you are. Now, some of us, very few, but some, perhaps their work, their jobs reflect what you are. And you have a job that you love, and it's in a full expression of what your soul wants. Or some of us deceive ourselves into thinking that because you do the best with what you have, Statistics show most people don't like the work they do, except if the reward is good enough, the compensation is good enough, it buys their love, so to speak, because you're getting something for it, so it's a give and take. It's like I give my life to something I don't necessarily like, but I'm getting in return something that gives me power or gives me the ability to buy whatever I want. So the question of who a person really is not at all a simple matter, because it really comes down to understanding what a soul is like. When you say who you really are, you're not talking about the body, because, God forbid, after death, you have a corpse. So a pathologist can dissect the body and figure out all the body parts and still not know who you are. Personality, the psyche and soul of a human being has a whole personality. That cannot be put under a microscope. You can't see it under any instrument. But there are people who are soul experts, soul doctors, who can see a soul. Those are people who are connected to their own soul, obviously. You can't see something you don't have yourself. And the soul, just like the body, and more than the body, has its own rules, and it has its own systems. So just like a body has, as we know, hundreds of systems, 75 trillion, not billion, but trillion cells. It's the only thing that's higher than the United States deficit, the cells in the human body. 75 trillion cells. And every cell is necessary. It's unfathomable even. We don't even know the number. 75 trillion is impossible to even imagine. But it's there. And we have hundreds and thousands of systems that work simultaneously right now inside your body. There's the circulatory system, the neurological, the nervous system, the muscular, the skeletal. And each one breaks down further and so on. I mean, it's an awesome exercise to just look at not just how each system functions, but how they all coordinate with each other, which is even more impossible to imagine. But it does. And understanding that, of course, helps us understand how we function, what health is about. And God forbid if a person is not healthy in any way, the more we understand those internal sciences, the things that make us tick, the better we can heal. But what about the soul? Has anyone ever did an equivalent study of the soul? How many cells are there in the soul? So not necessarily physical cells, but how many components, how many pieces? Well, this is, in essence, what true Torah is about. I know some people call it Kabbalah, and some people call it Chassidus, and some people call it Pnimis HaTorah. But the truth is, it is the essence of the entire Torah. And just to explain, in case some of you may wonder how I could say that, because most people would say Torah is a body of laws. I have right here a Chumash in front of me. It has 5 books. And most of it is, not all laws, but it was 613 mitzvahs, 248 positive, 365 negative, and the rest are the narrative, the biblical narrative from the beginning of creation, Genesis, through Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, through all those generations. Basically, 26 generations are covered in the entire Bible. From Adam to Noah is 10 generations. From Noah to Abraham is another 10. From Abraham to Moses is 7 generations. And the end of the Torah is with Moses passing after the 40 years traveling in the wilderness. That's the story. And anyone learning it saying that's the Torah. So we also know there's a Tanakh where the story continues with the Jews entering the Promised Land and Joshua and then the rest of the books and the kings and the prophets and the Skenim and so on. And then comes, of course, the body of oral Torah. But if someone asks in one sentence, what is the Torah? Very hard question to answer. A real scholar who studied the Torah all their lives, I know I went to yeshiva, so many would say the Torah is a body of law, how God wants us to live. Laws, to do this, laws that touch law between man, between man and God, ben adam l'chaveri, ben adam l'mokim. Is that really the definition of the Torah? Well, the answer is obvious because it's in the word Torah itself. What does the word Torah mean? Torah comes from the word Hira, a direction, a guide. It's a book of a guide, a directive. That's the word Torah. Torah also is equated with the word light, Torah or. The Aramaic for Torah is Eraisa. In the Zohar, the author of which is Lag BaOmer Rashbi, coming Sunday, says Eraisa comes from the word Oir Yaisa, the transmission of light. In Aramaic, Oir is light, in Hebrew as well. Yaisa in Aramaic means the transmission, to draw light. So here we go. Torah is direction, guide, light, drawing light. That's the actual definition, without any deeper interpretations. But here comes the biggest question of all. The Torah formally was given at Sinai, 26 generations after Genesis, after the creation. And yet we learn, in the Talmud it says that the patriarchs all studied Torah, all performed the Torah. But out of most of the Torah are all mitzvahs and events that are primarily took place after the Jews left Egypt. So how exactly did the patriarchs and matriarchs fulfilled all these mitzvahs that are all connected with leaving Egypt. For example, mezuzah, tefillin. I'm talking about Passover and the Seder. Everything connected to Passover. Tzitzis. I mean, there's so many things that are all connected to events that happen later. So what is this Torah exactly that existed before it was given at Sinai? Was it also a body of laws? More importantly, when you look deeper into the story, you read that the Torah is the blueprint by which God created the universe. The Medrash says that an architect first looks into a blueprint, first creates a blueprint, and then follows the blueprint to create a structure. And the same thing is an analogy for God creating the universe. Then you have the Zohar that says, Istakel baraisa or bara alma, that God looked into the Torah and created the universe. Which means the Torah preceded the universe. As it also says in the Medrash, Alpayim shana kod mater le'elam, the Torah precedes existence. So if the Torah is just this body of laws and these stories that all take place later, after existence, what was inside the blueprint that God looked at before everything came into being? This is the blueprint that created existence. So what did he look into the Torah and says, oh, there's a Garden of Eden and therefore I'll put a Garden of Eden? There was no Garden of Eden before. So this is where there's no choice, but you have to go into the writings of the Zohar and the writings of the Arizal, Kisvei Arizal, who, by the way, didn't write most of his writings. His student did, Chaim Vital, but it's still called Kisvei Arizal. And you have to look into the inner dimension of Torah to understand this, because this is all about the inner dimension of Torah. And what they explain is that the Torah is really, in one expression, is the divine mind at work. It's God's vision of existence. It doesn't begin in the Garden of Eden or in Egypt or in the valleys of Mesopotamia. It begins with God. That the creator, the composer, the cosmic engineer had a plan. And that plan is the Torah. It's one with him. So when you think of it like an architect or a composer of music, before even putting anything down on paper or creating anything, there's what the composer has. What does he envision? And that envision is each of us right here. And all that is really the essence of Torah, the blueprint by which existence comes into being. So actually it's the exact opposite. It's not that it starts with laws and narratives. It starts with God's vision, and that vision translates into laws and narratives. That's really the definition of Torah. So in its real, pure, pristine sense, the Torah is a spiritual entity. Just as God is beyond us all, the Torah too is beyond. And then the Torah began to so-called evolve into a language that we can relate to. Dibra Torah b'loshen b'nei Adam, speaks in our language. And in events that play out the vision that God wanted to play out. So if you really want to think of it this way, then the Torah is essentially the equivalent, la'avdil if you want, of a fundamental medical manual that gives you the biology and chemistry and the DNA of the human body. The Torah will give you the DNA of the soul and of the cosmos and of all of existence. So when someone really studies Torah properly, they're really seeing the building blocks of existence. When you hear it that way, you can begin to start thinking about Elokeinu, that it's your God, not just the God of your parents. You see, little children follow the rules, and they follow what their parents tell them to do, and they go to the schools, and they are indoctrinated in a certain system. It could be a beautiful system with all the mitzvahs and the laws. But what I said earlier, to become Elokeinu, your God, that's a whole different story. That's like a new life. That's after you were given everything on a platter in your education and by your parents, and I'm saying even the healthiest parents. Now starts a new journey, your journey. Elokeinu, what is your relationship with all of this? And that's why the story of Pesach Sheni is so relevant, because all of us are either Tomei Lenefesh or Derech Recheka, the two expressions. We're either been contaminated by life and life's experiences, or we just wandered and lost. And the fact that most of us won't acknowledge it doesn't mean anything. Most people who are lost don't know they're lost. You think you find somebody wandering somewhere and they've gotten accustomed and they've adjusted They'll tell you they're lost. No, they'll say this is where I always was and always I belong. One of the reasons we learn about what's called Yeridus HaNeshama B'Guf, how a soul enters down to this world, and you study where the soul comes from, is to teach you the first thing above all, that you're a stranger on this earth. The soul does not feel comfortable in the material world. And if you get too comfortable, it means there's some problem. Now the point is not to live an uncomfortable life. The point is to live a life that has a paradox. There's two forces at work. There's a restlessness that's always looking to go somewhere beyond. And then there's the realities on the ground. But we've adjusted and we've become accustomed. Most people have built their homes here. And we think this is the permanent place. The interesting thing in Jewish faith, this will be the permanent place. It's not like we wait to come to the world to come and that's where the show starts. It will be here. But it will be here with an understanding that this place itself becomes a spiritual environment. So we live in a world, as the thinkers say, most people think we're on a physical journey having a spiritual experience. When in truth, we're on a spiritual journey having a physical experience. But ask yourself, which one do you really feel? Most of us feel the physical journey. From time to time, we have a spiritual experience. You know, we hear a song, we sing, the holiday comes, moments, simchas, weddings, celebrations, sometimes sad moments, and so on. We have a break from reality. This is reality. So the first challenge is to come to realize, to weaken the hold of this so-called false reality on you and your consciousness. Now some people, it comes easy. Some people naturally know and sense that this is not where it's at. Many don't. And it's very hard even to explain. How could you explain colors to a blind person? Can you explain music to a deaf person? And that's not coming from an arrogant place. It's a different reality. Some people are deeply materialistic. What is tangible and concrete, that's the only thing they relate to. Everything else is fantasy. Maybe nice ideas, and maybe those are the people you can take advantage of because they're like not in touch with reality down here. The creative dreamers, the Luft people, they call them. What do you say? Luft, the airy people. People who float, floaters. So here we have this chapter where the people come to Moses and Aaron and they complain. They say, why are we deprived? Just because we got lost, or just because we experienced grief or death and we became impure, why are we deprived? Why can we not connect? Just because we're lost souls, can we not do anything about it? And Moses didn't know what to answer because, as I said before, he did not have a precedent. All the mitzvahs you cannot replace. Once the overzmane batel karboni, the day passes, you can't pray tomorrow for today. Every day has its energy, has its birur, has its refinement. Like the Zohar says, chasu yema chasu levusha. If you're missing a day, you're missing a garment. So there's certain mitzvahs that are time sensitive that can't be replaced. So Moses didn't know what to do, but on the other hand, he saw the heartfelt cry of Lama Negara, why they felt lost, they felt missing something. So he turned to God and he knew that the power of prayer does things, and God said, here, I'll give you a new mitzvah. One time, you'll have the ability that's in Shtokim Farfal to show you that you can experience something even if you missed it at the time. In other words, even if you lost your way, you have an ability to return. Of course, that comes with work. But above all, it came because they cried out. They tell the story of one of the Rebbes that a chassid of his had a big problem. He came to him, he cried out his heart. And the Rebbe told him, I can't help you. Well, as much as he tried and as much as he demanded and to no avail, so he leaves the room absolutely shattered because he thought this was his last hope. And he meets the older brother of this Rebbe. And the older brother says, what's the matter? Why are you so disturbed? He says, I went to the Rebbe, your brother. It was my last hope. I thought a Rebbe is a Rebbe. He can open up new doors, give me some hope. And instead he told me he can't help me. So his brother, hearing this, the older brother walks into his brother, the Rebbe, and says to him, You're giving the powers to be a Rebbe not to break people's hearts, but to help them. So the Rebbe said to him, send him back in here. When he came back in, he helped him. Later, he explained to his brother that he came in here thinking, I'm going to solve his problems, which meant it wasn't about him. He wanted my intervention. And he did not have I sensed he did not have enough in him, the motivation to really, because I can give him blessings, but then he'd have to maintain them. You see, it's one thing is to help somebody, one other is to be maintained in your life. Someone can lift you up, but the question is, once they're gone, will you still be able to stand on your own feet? So that's what he sensed. So everything is a two-way street. In Judaism, there's no such thing as magic pills and magic tricks. Yes, there were miracles, and there were times where God is merciful and can be grace, and with grace give somebody something, even though they may not have asked for it or not deserved it. But that's something we don't rely on or depend on. The key thing is to know, because they cried out, and sincere, heartfelt cry, that Lama Nigara, that's what did it. So the first step in any type of healing, the first step in any type of growth or healing is to cry out, which means, as a Yediyah Samachla Chetzi Refuah, awareness of an illness is half the cure. And like the analogy you always give is with the doctor, if someone had a stroke, God forbid, and their nerves were severed and could not feel anything. And after months and months and months of being numb, one day the doctor pinches or pricks the patient, and he yells out, and the doctor, of course, is ecstatic. And he says, why are you so happy about it? I'm in pain. He says, well, because I was doing this for 5 months and you didn't feel anything. So the sensation of pain, even though we're great at painkillers, and we love to get rid of temporary pain, but imagine you had no pain in your life. If we had no nerves, and we didn't feel anything, you'd be able to, God forbid, bite off your tongue and experience other tragic things. Pain is really basically a warning signal that there's something wrong. It's a gift. It's a gift if there's something wrong, obviously, because it's warning you do something about it. Obviously, there are shallow, superficial pain. You can get rid of it without digging deeper, great. But some pain is a real warning. The same is true with psychological pain. If a person feels, at times you feel certain sadness. There are times people burst out crying for no apparent reason. Those are sensitive souls. Or you sometimes remember something or hear a song. It reminds you, it connects you to something. Those moments of sensitivity and sensation are the healthiest things in a human being's life. They say tears bathe the soul. It's like a bath for the soul. Again, we live in a society that doesn't worship tears. Men don't cry, they tell us. Women who are fickle and weak, that's the perception. But tears is a sign of a person who's healthy. The Rizal says, about a Semei Tshuva, he says a person who doesn't cry in the 10 days of Tshuva, Ein Nishmosei Shlema, his soul is not complete. Because it's a sign of sensitivity. A person who's able to recognize that this reality is not where it's at, and there's something greater and higher, that's a person who cries at times. We're not talking about tears of grief and not tears of weakness. You're talking about tears of awareness. Awareness. A type of awareness of something beyond us all, like a sense of awe. So the first thing for any person to grow is a type of awareness. If you don't have that, you're not going very far, because you're content. And when a person is content, it leads to apathy. Vayishman yishurin vayivad. The more content you are, the more apathetic you become. It's a formula. It's a rule. And it's a rule even in the material world. People who are become happy with their lot and just remain there usually start stagnating. It's competition, pressure, being challenged. And sometimes, yes, something, loss, that motivates people. But we don't need to experience it necessarily in a negative way. In this case, it was these people who just simply sensed that they were distant. They sensed that they missed an opportunity, and they didn't want to go away deprived. And they demanded, and they prevailed. So there's a story in the Zohar. Since Sunday is Lag Bomer. Lag Bomer is the day of the yahrzeit of the Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is the author of the Zohar. The Zohar is the classic text of Kabbalah. And it's a cryptic book. Much of it is hard to understand, or almost impossible. There are a lot of stories there, and there are things that are pretty understandable. And primarily, there are a lot of things there that are not understandable then, but over the years, with explanations of later sages, we have an understanding of many ideas in the Zohar. Today, Zohar is not necessarily something you go to learn. You learn it through the commentaries. You learn it through Chassidus. You learn it through books that explain it in ways that we can relate to. But it is in a way, the Bible of Kabbalah. It is the original book. It was authored, as I said, by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, despite some of some Gershon Shalom and other people's theories. It was discovered in caves in the 15th century, in cities around Italy, Manitoba and Cremona, different versions. And at the time, no one understood what they were until a few sages saw these manuscripts, and they immediately recognized it because it was passed on orally, generation to generation, and quoted even in certain books, but only fragments of it. And then it was published then. I'm not going to go through a whole history of the Zohar, but the Zohar, at the end of the Zohar, there's a whole description. It's called the Idra Zuta, which means the small group, small cave, and it talks about the passing of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, his last days. And there he actually instructs his student Rab Abba to write down the Zohar. So the actual writing of the Zohar was his student Rab Abba, but it was all dictated and all part of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's teachings. There are books today in English that really break down the Zohar. There are sections of the Zohar actually are attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu. There's sections called Raya Mehemna, which means faithful shepherd. These are sections that Moshe Rabbeinu in his time, Moses taught the Kabbalah in his time. Kabbalah is the inner Torah, which means it's not some revelation that came later. It was given at Sinai. As a matter of fact, Sinai probably was more of a Kabbalistic experience than a Talmudic one. You know, they saw the sounds, they heard the sights, there was a vision. You know, what was going on at Sinai? It was definitely a mystical experience, which we don't fully comprehend. So if anything, they probably had more exposure to the so-called inner Torah than the outer then. As I said earlier, it is the inner Torah that's the essence of the Torah, stripped before it manifests in the narrative and the story and the episodes. So, in the Zohar there are many, as I said, stories. One of them is, well, two I want to mention. One is not really a story, it's an expression. Right in the beginning of the Zohar, there's an expression called, that in the beginning of it all, there was a dark lamp, a lamp of darkness. And obviously, the term lamp of darkness immediately conjures up, it's a contradiction of terms. A lamp is not dark. A lamp gives off light. And at the time, however they understood it, but years later, centuries later, the Arizal also opens his classic book called Eitz Chaim, Tree of Life, with a similar expression, not called the lamp, he calls it the tzimtzum. That in the beginning of it all there was light, and then God concealed it all, and it became dark, like a black hole. And when you look at the beginning of the Torah, the Bible, you also find the same expression. After the first verse, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, it says, it says the earth was chaotic, confused, and there was darkness over all of existence. And then the Spirit of God, Ruach Elikim Merachefes al Pnei Hamayim. Now this is a verse in the Torah, it's the second verse. Now if you tell me this is a halachic verse, this is pure mysticism. However, it's not so mystical as it sounds in a way, you know, because what does that mean? What kind of darkness? What toihu, voihu? So you need Kabbalah to explain the simple first verses of the Torah. And even when you go on, you talk about the creation of human being. It says that God instilled in a human being the image of God. B'Tselem Elokim. What is the image of God exactly? We're told that God has no image. And suddenly Tselem Elokim, a human being, is an image of God. As one of the philosophers once asked, where's the only place in the Torah that God transgresses his second commandment? Not to create anything in the graven image of God. God himself created something in the image of God. That's the human being. So the first verses in the Bible, in the Torah, the first opening of Zohar, the opening of Eitz Chaim, all begin with this concept of a darkness. So there's a story later in the Zohar that Rashbi and his son Rabbi Elazar, who for 12 years had to hide in a cave because the Romans were out to kill him for studying Torah in public, which was considered a crime. So in those dark times of the Roman times, Rashbi and Rabbi Elazar were once, during those 12 years, once in the morning, they studying Torah all night, and the night is dark, of course, and it came early morning. If you ever stay up and you see the dawn break, it's an interesting phenomenon. And Rashbi said to Rabbi Elazar, when he looked at the dawn breaking, he said, what do you see? And he said, you start seeing, first the sky gets a little light in the horizon, then you start seeing one glimmer, another peak, and slowly the dawn begins to break. The dawn begins to break, and then the sun begins to rise. So Rashbi says to Rabbi Elazar, life in our times is dark, life is dark in all times, but how will the redemption come? Personal redemption and global redemption, it will come like the dawn breaks. Kayeles hashachar. It doesn't come in a moment. It comes through glimpses. First, here's a glimmer, there's a glimmer, and you can think that nothing's happening. So in the dawn, it takes just a few minutes, or maybe a half hour or an hour until you see it emerge. But in our lives, it may take a little more. But those glimmers are the key thing because they are the sign that something is emerging, something is happening. That's what he told him, which is, of course, a lesson to us all in life about the lamp of darkness, that it's dark, but there's a lamp in there somewhere. What do they say? Ronald Reagan, they called him the eternal optimist, that like the little farm boy that opens up a barn. The barn is covered with manure from the floor to the ceiling. So most of us would, say something negative, and the little farm boy says, "Oh, there must be a pony in here somewhere." Sometimes very intense darkness tells you that there's something maybe in there too, and not to be deceived by how dark it looks. So that's what Rashbi told Rabbi Elazar, which is essentially in the process of any growth or healing, it's the necessity is to have something to hold on to. Some type of glimpse, some type of glimmer. He said that's how it will all rise. The expression actually, Alois HaShachar, those of you who may know Hebrew, Alois HaShachar, the Zohar asks this, seems like a strange expression. Alois HaShachar means the rising of what? It should have said Alois HaShemesh, the sun rises. Shachar is darkness. Shachrus comes from the word shachar, from dark. So what does it mean, the rising of the darkness? It's the exact opposite. So the Zohar answers, Alois HaShachar means that the darkness lifts, not really the rising of the dawn. Alois HaShachar means the lifting of the darkness. And the lifting of the darkness in face of the light that emerges. As you know, a little light can dispel much darkness. I mean, you have this story plays itself out also when Jacob fights with the angel. The same thing, it says that they fought all night. At night, you're at war, because night is dark. It's confusing. That's the time when the criminals, and they said the the unwanted forces emerge. And when the dawn started breaking, the angel recognized that time he can no longer stay here. So there too is used Alois HaShachar. The Ramban says that the war between Jacob and the angel, the wrestle between the two, well, the Zohar says that it happened Yom Kippur night, actually. And as the Ramban says, this reflects the war that all of us fight throughout history with our enemies. Every form of oppression plays out that battle that night. And obviously that also includes all our internal battles. So we have a world that is completely surrounded in darkness. To the point, as the Baal Shem Tov says, Haster Aster Panai, and Esther, a double darkness. Haster Aster, it's so dark that the darkness conceals that it's dark, that to the point that you think that Mar Lamosik, you think that bitterness is sweet and sweetness is bitter. That's how dark it can become. So we're here to wake each other up in a way. And there are experiences in life where we'll have wake-up calls. And those are the great blessings. It's the moments when you feel the dissonance and you feel the pain and then you feel there's something wrong. The Loma Negara, when you feel deprivation of something, that's when there's a real opening. Unfortunately, most of us misunderstand those moments, and we either try to push them away because it's uncomfortable. We'd rather go back to a comfortable past than an uncomfortable future. Or we misunderstand the meaning of it and we think something's wrong with us. The truth is that's awareness. It's not comfortable, but it is real. And that reality is what opens the door to great strengths. You know, as I said before, each of our souls has unbelievable potential. And unfortunately, most of that potential is trapped in our conventions, in our routines, in our daily lives, in our upbringing, programs, and most importantly, maybe the things that people expect from us. You know, we're creatures of habit and also creatures of social animals, which means we're dependent on other people's approval. Even people call themselves independent. You know, I don't know what independent means, how independent is, but everyone needs peer approval. You know, even independent people make sure that independence is also approved. So you're approved to be an independent, so to speak. An Abraham, Echad Haya Avram, who actually rebelled against the whole world, including his family, including his whole society, a complete nonconformist. I don't know if we could really find a person like that on earth today. Because we all have our comfort zones. And sometimes our comfort zones are very, very comfortable, and they keep us trapped. So, and I think to myself, coming here, this class tonight, I've been doing this almost, I don't know, I don't even want to say how many years. Was it 30 years? Going on 30. And you know, I sometimes wonder whether it's more for me or for you. I think in the world like we live in, the idea of making happy people miserable and miserable people happy is an interesting experiment. What I mean by that is that comfort zones don't bring out the best in anybody. And I've discovered in my own personal life that pressure is critical. And it's always best to put the pressure on yourself before someone else puts it on you, and lock yourself into certain situations. You know, I have no doubt, based on my experience and my understanding, you know, we live in a world today of a lot of upheaval. Many people are very frightened because it doesn't take much for this world to explode now. There's so many ingredients. It's like a combustion chamber. Here in the Middle East, dissent, anger. I mean, Israel is now beginning to feel it more than ever. So there's a lot to be pessimistic about, and very frightening and fatalistic, and even apocalyptic. I mean, what do you need? Just you need a country like Egypt or other countries. Somebody is going to get control of a certain arsenal, press a few buttons. You can create a lot of damage. I know it's hard to imagine. We don't even want to think about it. So there's a whole scenario that is very, very negative, apocalyptic scenario. Nevertheless, this is where it comes down to people of vision that have given us some vision from the past that see a bigger picture. A bigger picture doesn't mean that we won't have moments of relapse and pain and setbacks, but the bigger picture is exactly as Rashbi told it to his son. That light emerges, and it emerges step by step. If you're wise, you can expedite the process. If not, sometimes it draws on and on and on. But you see, in our case, it's easier to relate to and believe because the past is a lesson. Who was right? Were the Romans survived or did Rashbi and his son survive? So you have real lessons, and not once, not twice. And if you really want to go back to Abraham himself, Avram Avinu, when God, the Bris Bein Absarim, the covenant that God made with Abraham, which is like the basis of the whole relationship between God and the Jewish people. So read the verses in Lech Lecha, which are also very cryptic and mystical, where it talks about that Abraham fell into a trance, and he sensed a deep dread and darkness overcame him. And that's when God says to him that your children and grandchildren will be for 400 years in a land that's not theirs, as strangers. And then they will come out with great wealth. And all the Midrashim and all the commentaries explain that verse. What was the dread? What was the darkness? And they said each verse there, each word, Ema, Cheshecha, Charei, Degdela, and all that, all refer to the empires to come. The Egyptian Empire, of course, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and finally the final empires. The Barbanel says it includes the Roman Empire, which destroyed the Second Temple, and we are still in that, under that control. Not Roman, but the Western Christian world. And the second would be the empire, the Ishmaelite Empire, the Muslim Empire, the Ottoman Empire. All brought a great dread over a man called Avram Avinu. But he wasn't frightened, and he taught his children this vision, and they passed it on, and that's why they were able to survive it all. The night of Pesach, we say, V'hisha amdelanu, that even though in each generation there will be those that try to destroy us. V'hi, what's V'hisha amdelanu? It says it in a cryptic, vague term, he. He means she. She will withstand. She will prevail over everything. So what's the he? Could have just said. So there are two interpretations. Some say faith, our faith. Some say the promise. It's really both. It's faith and the promise. The promise that God gave Abraham. The promise that Abraham passed on generation to generation. The faith that they had. That prevails over everything. Even the Holocaust and even all the tragedies before that. And it's said in the Vihi, Kabbalah says Vihi is Malchus, is the dignity and the faith of a human being. Malchus les lo megamal klum. It has no power and light of its own. It's like the moon. The moon only reflects the sun, but the power of Malchus is greater than the power of the sun. The moon has its own power that the sun will never have. It's the power that comes from the lamp of darkness. It's the power that comes from the light that comes at night. And you see the moon has its own haunting power. It has its own romantic energy, even though it's just a reflection, but it's not a reflection like a mirror reflection. The moon has its own power. As they say that people in love don't stare at the sun. They look at the moon. And the moonlight is what Jews are compared to. Israel, Daimim l'Levana, Mainim l'Levana. Because just as the moon goes through its cycles, and it goes through it waxes and wanes, and is about to die, it's just reborn again, the new moon, Rosh Chodesh. So too the Jewish people. The nations of the world are compared to the sun, a certain steady light, but you don't have renewal. And again, the Talmud says, compares David Huakotan and Yaakov Huakotan, it compares the greats all to the moon. Because the moon in its so-called, in its humility, its power is much greater than the sun's power. The sun knows how to give, but doesn't know how to take, doesn't know how to receive. I say receive, not take. I don't mean like being a schnorrer that knows how to take. I meant knows how to absorb. And this moon knows how to absorb. And that power, called in Hasidic terminology, Oyer Chezer, refractive energy, as opposed to Oyer Yosha, which is direct light, is more powerful than anything. It's the power that comes from the Talmidei Yesem Mekulim when a teacher teaches. So the Talmud says, where do you learn most from? He says, I learn much from my teachers, I learn more from my friends, colleagues, and I learn most from Talmidei Yesem Mekulim. I learn most from my students. Now, how could a great teacher, learn most from the students? His teachers are greater than him. His colleagues are equal to him. Because there's something that happens when you reach outward, you have to go much deeper inward. And that's what the moon is able to reach. So we have a mission in this world. Our soul was sent precisely to be lost in this world. But it's not completely lost. It has signals. It has its own internal GPS system, let's put it that way, that allows it to retrace the steps. You have a sense of things. God blessed us with music, with song. He blessed us with many things that remind us of something greater than our here and now. The key thing is to be wise and not be seduced and deceived by the temporary elements of superficial world. To recognize that there's something beneath the surface and it's waiting to emerge. And on a very basic level, it's about us, you and I. Each of us has enormous potential. Are you fulfilling your mission in this world? Why were you sent here? You know, the clock ticks, we get older, and you can't turn the clock back. It's true, there's no farfal, you could always repair things. There's still the clock still ticks. So the real question is what we can do for each other to help actualize our our potential, and particularly our calling. That's what it comes down to. To me, that's what I discovered. You know, I went to yeshiva system and I learned the Torah that anyone that goes to yeshiva learns. But when I discovered my God, not just the God of my parents, it was understanding that. That's what it comes down to. That you have an indispensable mission to fulfill. Every one of us here, every one of us. And what you have to accomplish, no one else can accomplish but you. And the sad part is most of us have no clue. First of all, that we have the mission, let alone what the mission is itself. And I don't say that in a critical way. It's just reality. By the time, this should have been taught to us in yeshiva when we were not busy making a living and we had the time to explore. By the time you start thinking like an adult, you're already overwhelmed by responsibilities. You have a family, you have parnasa to make, other stuff. You know, they taught. I heard this TED conference, one of those talks by who was it? Some educator from England. Brilliant talk. A very short talk like these. They're all 18-minute talks. So he's talking about education, the education system, and essentially what he says is that where does our modern Western education system come from? And he says it was established essentially by Napoleon and Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great. What? Frederick the Great from Austria, Prussia, the Emperor of Prussia. Now, how did they establish the education system, which is affects still today? They call it elementary school because elementary is training for army. So they created a curriculum that would train children to become soldiers, basically, and then Napoleon added the element of economic success, money and war, basically. And they essentially made the primary curriculum is around, if you look, everything that's utilitarian, mathematics, history, social studies, science, and stuff like that. The arts, music, song, dance, all relegated as so-called special education, like extracurricular activities. And he makes the case that children naturally are singers and dancers and musical. And what happens is school cuts all that out, devalues it, and basically trains them to become accountants and lawyers and doctors and soldiers in a certain way. Very tangible, practical, concrete things. I mean, it's a very interesting talk that he gives and how essentially goes against the grain of the natural human being. That doesn't mean every one of us is a musician, but it means we relate to the more ethereal things. Education has nothing to do with ethereal elements. Nothing subtle about it. It's all about utility, function, success, making money, efficiency on the battlefield. So today may not be battles in the physical sense, but it's the same type of tangible stuff. So I was thinking how that impacted the yeshiva system. What's going on in our internal yeshiva system. So in very many ways, it's very parallel. The main focus in the yeshiva system is learning law, learning the Torah law. You begin, as a young child, you learn Aleph Beis, ABC, then you learn Chumash and basically biblical commentary, Most of it is taught as something that happened thousands of years ago. You just master that. The commentaries, how they argue about it. Then you start learning Mishnah and Gemara and so on, all about basically the legalities of Judaism, the mechanics of Judaism. It's all important. Very little focus on the ethereal. You're not taught about God. You're not taught about your soul. You're not taught about your purpose in this world. So essentially, you're taught about a whole bunch of mechanics that are all necessary. It's like you're taught about the tool chest, but you're not taught what you're supposed to do with this tool chest, except follow the laws. And in a way, that's like the difference between the outer Torah and the inner Torah. So as we stand here today, Pesach Sheni comes right 4 days before Lag BaOmer. This is the 15th of the year. This is the 18th of the year. Maybe it's a good opportunity. The Rebbe, one of the Rebbes, Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, says that Lag BaOmer is the Matan Torah of Primis HaTorah. At Sinai, we were giving mostly the outer Torah, even though, as I said before, it was a mystical experience. But on an outer level, we were given the, and at Lag BaOmer, he says, was like the revelation of the inner Torah, of Shimon Bar Yochai. Without it, the Torah is rendered into, basically, as I said, mechanical, a toolbox. All necessary to function, but lacking the soul and lacking its purpose. So that's, in a way, a challenge of our times, is how do you communicate that? How do you communicate it both to people who grew up in a very intense yeshiva environment, and, of course, also communicate to people who did not have a yeshiva experience at all? Understanding that inner dynamic. It's very difficult to teach somebody who never learned what Shabbos is or kosher. You start telling them the law, it can be very overwhelming. But when you tell them that the Torah teaches you the purpose of your life, and that purpose is fulfilled through keeping Shabbos, it's a whole different story. You can relate to that. It's relevant. I'm not suggesting it has to only be in that direction. Whatever works, works. But generally speaking, you speak to people, you get them to relate to God when it becomes your God. A God that is my soul at work here. My actualization of my purpose here. The Rashbi, right before he passed away, he asked that this day, Sunday, Lag BaOmer, should be a simcha, a celebration. He's the only yahrzeit that we celebrate in that type of way. Comes, for example, Zayin Adar, the yahrzeit of Moses. Some people fast. On Lag BaOmer, Rashbi insisted that it be Yom Simchasei, a day of celebration, to the point that there was a Talmud of his, there was a sage who every day would bring a offering in the temple for repentance, and as a result, he was in a sense punished because Rashbi was not happy that he did it in Lag BaOmer. So Lag BaOmer is considered a celebration. Now, how could you call a death a celebration? It's true, thousands of years later, well, not thousands, we're like 1,800 years later now, you could say today we only celebrate. But he said it to his students then. What did he expect them not to sit shiva for him? Halachically, you have to grieve over, especially a tzaddik, a teacher. But Rashbi, being a person from the inner world of the spirit, understood that even though we cannot see behind the curtain, the real pain of death is a result of this fact that even though those souls see us, we don't see them. So there's no pain on that side of the curtain. The pain is on this side because we can't see. We can't see the connection. And we feel that there's like two different worlds, or it's like disappeared. Rashbi comes from that world and lived that world. He was called Nun Yama, like the fish in the sea, always connected to the source. It says in some, the Hillel Parasha, a great chassid, wrote once in the name of the Alter Rebbe, that for souls like the Rashbi, there was no churban. Those souls did not experience destruction. Because there's a place in the cosmos that is like beyond its symptom, that does not feel the pain, does not experience the pain of this world. And even though it relates to it, but it's from a different place. So Rashbi gave us, in a sense, a gift. Lag BaOmer is a day that's a very mysterious day. Nobody really understands what this day is about. I mean, yes, it's the day that he passed away, but you see the celebrations. Children are taken to the fields, and celebrations and parades, whatever it may be. There are all kinds of different ways. And it's not really clear, what exactly are we celebrating? But it's part of this mystery of Rashbi introducing into this world a joy. Interestingly, it happens right in the middle of the days of Sfira. because this is the days where the students of Rabbi Akiva died in an epidemic because of their divisiveness. Rashbi was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva who taught that love is paramount, and he was one of those that was not part of that divisiveness. So in a way, right in the middle of a sad period, Rashbi introduces joy, again teaching us that within the darkness, even when you're lost, there is light. And just as a parallel, the Arizal's yahrzeit, if you may know when it is, it's also in an interesting period, the 5th of Av, right in the 9 days, right between Rosh Chodesh, smack between 4 days before Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in the year, Arizal has a yahrzeit. I discussed this once, I think, a few years ago at length. Anyway, to sum it all up, let me say this. I think that for me it's a great honor to intersect with souls like yourselves and those that are in cyberspace. So even though the technology is the connection, but the souls are still there. Because, as the Baal Shem Tov says, God leads the footsteps of people. The reason we meet may be for all kinds of ostensible external reasons, but the main reason we meet is because there's something that we can help each other with, which means there's something I can offer you and something you could offer me. And in the context of our higher purpose. I was blessed to be in the right time, in the right place, and heard the right things. And I see also we live in a world where we are all lost souls. I include myself in that category in some ways, but we're also in a place where we have some awareness and we can wake each other up. So it is really an honor to be part of another person's life's journey, because part of the honor is also the mystery of it. It's not like you always know where it's going to go, but you know something's happening. And when we set our minds to it and we focus on the bigger picture as opposed to the immediate here and now, things emerge. There's all kinds of fascinating and rich experiences that I've had that I had not taken upon myself. Some of the things I do, I would never have experienced, and it's amazing, the journey. So though there are many things in life that are difficult and challenging, I just wanted to share that and in a way say thank you as well. And I hope that each of you in your own way, the people you intersect with, look at it like creating the connections. The Kabbalists like to say that each of us is allocated with a certain amount of divine sparks. Those divine sparks are embedded and buried and hidden in the places that you're going to travel to, where you'll be tonight, where you'll be tomorrow, where you'll be the next day, the people you meet, the opportunities that come your way. And every one of them is an opportunity. So a good businessman, wherever he goes, he's always looking for opportunities. And a good spiritual journeyer, a soul journeyer, is looking for spiritual opportunities, recognizing that there's always a reason that you're interacting, there's something to be done. Now, whether all of us can have that type of intensity all the time to be on call in that way, I don't know. But moments for sure. And once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. And after a while, it grows on you and becomes pretty exciting. It also helps to relieve the monotony of life. Because maybe the greatest challenge of all is the boredom. The routines, the monotony, we look for new highs. And when a person doesn't get excitement and passion in healthy things, they will go elsewhere. That's the rule of the game. That's how it works. So understanding that everything that you meet, every experience you have is a potential explosive energy waiting to erupt based on your catalyst, based on your action, that gives life a whole different type of meaning. Everything, therefore, is filled with potential power. And it's a way of looking at life. It's a way of taking control of your life as opposed to life taking control of you. So on this day, Pesach Sheni, when there's Nishtakim Farfalm, the point is, no matter how lost or how, let's put it this way, you have the word? Not fatalistic. If you've given up hope on yourself, here's a day that reminds us that there's no way, that there's no reason to do so. But you have to do something. You have to cry out at times. You have to wake yourself up. So hopefully some of these words can help energize and serve as a little wake-up call. And I want to say, if anybody needs any particular specific thing that cannot be addressed, like, in a generic way in a group, you can feel free to call on me and call on Velva right here. And I want to also say that this class is dedicated by Philip Namaworth in memory of the birthday of his father, Naftali ben Eliyahu, who was born Pesach Sheni 100 years ago. That's interesting. 5671. Okay. And also the memory of the Yahrzeit of his brother Eliyahu ben Naftali on the 20th of Ir, and the memory of his cousin Rachel Bas Anna. And finally, the memory of the Yahrzeit of Nancy's grandmother, Lily's great-grandmother, Yehudit Bat Yisrael. If you know Philip is very thorough. Made sure everybody's covered here. So, a lot of Yahrzeits here. And I want to say finally that if you're here for the first time, please stay in touch. If you haven't left your email, please leave us your email address. We can give you some updates about the classes or any other new things that come up. And again, more importantly, if there's anything that I can do or we can do for you in your journey, you don't hesitate to call upon us. So, I don't know how you're celebrating Lag BaOmer, but there are many ways to do so. If you'd like some ideas, you can come over to me afterwards and I could share some. And meanwhile, until our next segment, the next segment, which will be next Wednesday night, I bid everybody a pleasant evening. And also announcing that Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So either email us or contact us. We'll tell you where it is. It's not here. It's at a different location. And finally, very good night. Thank you.